prominent organizational theorist, said leadership is part poetry, part plumbing. When somebody asked him, what is more important, poetry or plumbing, he is known to have said, it depends on the audience. When I'm talking to an audience that's very well versed in the poetry aspect of leadership, which is imagination, creativity, meaning-making, purpose, inspiration, I typically emphasize the plumbing part of management, which is systems, processes, designs, and optimization. But when students are really good, or my audience is good at systems and numbers, then I talk to them about the poetry part of leadership. So given this brilliant audience before me, I think it's apt for me to talk about poetry. Okay, and it also makes sense because given my background, just to tell you briefly, as Saksham said, I learned classical Indian dance from one of the top performers in the country, and I not only learned the technique of dance, I think hanging around, interacting with some of the top artists of our country, I got an insight into the artistic way of living and being and thinking. And then, of course, I did an MBA and worked in the corporate world, which I absolutely loved. In the last 15 years, I've been doing management research and teaching, curious about why organizations and why people are the way they are. So in some senses, when I look back, I feel like I've clocked in the Gladwellian 10,000 hours. Malcolm Gladwell says, of course, drawing from psychology research, that it takes typically 10,000 hours of practice to gain expertise or mastery in a complex skill. And I think I may have clocked those 10,000 hours in 3 professional domains, spanning 2 different worlds, the arts and the management. Now, the arts and the management, Jim March is true. Over the years, I've reflected around what are the differences between these two. And as Jim March says, I do think they're starkly different. Both of them have their unique strengths, and of course, the arts are very special to my heart. But I think there are certain things that artists do that are underemphasized in the business world. In fact, some of the things that artists are known for is seen as inefficient, suboptimal, or irrational in the context of business. But from my own experience in the world of business, I've seen that those things lead to outcomes that are extremely valuable in the world of business. Most importantly, given what we are seeing AI has been doing, I doubt if you can any longer claim computation to be the advantage in your professional careers. I think you're at a point in time where you're desperately looking, you should be looking for something that marks you out as special, that makes you irreplaceable. And I do think that the arts might have some tips for you. What I want to focus on one thing today is one specific thing that's central to arts, that's very central to creative life itself. And that's what I call craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is fundamentally the desire to do something extremely well for its own sake. Nassim Taleb calls this as having soul in the game. When what you've invested in work is way more than your money, you've invested your entire being, your love, your care, and your interest. And I want to speak to that craftsmanship today. Now, what does it mean to do something extremely well for its own sake? In practice, what this is to pursue standards that are way above the standards around you. It's to set a benchmark for quality, a set of internal standards that the institutions that you're working in don't expect. They neither expect it nor they're going to incentivize it. So in the short term, internal standards receive no reward, no recognition. Effectively, when craftspeople have internal standards, they're actually paying for it out of their own pocket. Let's look at a couple of examples, right? I can't help but talk about Leonardo da Vinci. He is like the patron saint of craftspeople. Leonardo was a painter, he was a draftsman, he was an engineer, he was a sculptor. But there's one thread that underlies all these endeavors, which is a sense of craftsmanship. It's said that at some point, he'd spent several nights in hospitals doing animal dissections, doing dissections on human cadavers. Now, why would a painter do that? Apparently, he thought that to make a brilliant painting of a human figure or an animal, you had to understand its inner life. And that, of course, influenced and informed some of his classic works like The Last Supper. Now, the interesting question is, were his patrons caring, or did they care about anatomical accuracy? Of course not. Was any artist in Florence doing this? They weren't. Why did Da Vinci do this? Not because he cared about perfectionism, but he had an ethic that if you had to do a work, you had to do it by understanding it extremely well. Otherwise, it would be illogical to do it. Now, before you get this impression that craftsmanship is some kind of self-indulgence, doing things out of a whim, you're very far from the truth. Craftsmanship comes from a deep place of care. Care for the user. User, not because they bring in revenues, care for the user, not because you want to retain those users, or because you want to build a brand image. Care from a sense of responsibility. Care from a sense of trusteeship. You wonder, who is this product for? What is the life of the person who's going to use this? How is my product going to impact it? Am I doing full justice to the person there? In effect, you're not looking at the user as a data point. You're looking at the user as somebody who has a full inner life, somebody who trusts you, and therefore you ought to do the very best. Now, also, before you get the impression that this whole thing about responsibility, trusteeship feels very heavy, craftsmanship comes from great sense of playfulness. Think of it as the kind of care that you have when you're hanging out with a friend. You have a sense of trusteeship for your friends, right? You keep their secrets well. You feel responsible for their well-being, but none of it is done as a sense of duty. You hang around with them because you enjoy talking to them. You love interacting with them, and you feel so great when you're being with them. That is craftsmanship. Let's take a more contemporary example, Steve Jobs. We all know Steve Jobs is supposed to have toiled endlessly to get the fonts right, to get the packaging right. Because he wasn't just caring about the functional uses of his needs of his users, he cared about their aesthetic needs, the sense of pleasure they would feel when they opened those boxes. And you might have heard this story where he is known to have spent a lot of time when he designed the Macintosh, designing the circuit board. Many engineers in this room, you would say, how foolish, right? And apparently his engineers were annoyed because that ended up taking a lot of time, a lot of money for something that the customers would never see. To which Steve Jobs apparently replied, he said his father taught him how to build a fence and said, you know, when you build a fence, use good wood for the inner side. People might not see it, but you will know. Craftsmanship comes from a great sense of integrity, a sense of alignment between who you are, what you say you're going to do, and what you're effectively doing. But you know, we don't need to look that far. Just look around us. Look at this beautiful campus. What is this if not an act of great love and care? I'm sure when Dr. Balkrishna Doshi designed this in the 70s or the 60s, nobody in India expected a school, an educational institution to look like this, least of all a business school, right? The obvious thing, the efficient thing would have been to just put together a bunch of concrete blocks, set up functional classrooms. It would have saved a lot of space. But no, what Dr. Doshi was going for was a care. He was driven by a care for his users, for people like you and me, people he's never met in his life. He cared about our spiritual needs. Apparently, he said, when he designed this beautiful building, these colonnades, these archways where light comes in through so beautifully, he said he wanted an element of surprise. When you're sitting in your classroom, and when I'm sitting in my office, he didn't want us to feel claustrophobic the way we feel in our traditional classrooms. You've been in those buildings, I've been in those, or our corporate offices. He said he wanted us to feel like we were amidst nature. I don't know about you, but it changes the very way I work. You know, when I walk into this beautiful campus, I feel a sense of reverence for the person who built this with so much craftsmanship and care for me. So when I turn up to class, I really want to do something that's worthy of this beautiful place and of the craftsmanship of Dr. Doshi. When I do research, I want my research to be worthy of this place because somebody did not have to do this, but they did this. Now you might say, all that's great. It actually sounds good, but what are the benefits of living like this? First of all, I think setting internal standards that are way higher than external standards obviously differentiates you. It sets you apart. You become exceptional not because a blue chip company hired you. You become exceptional because you decided to do work that is above average. You don't need anybody to call you exceptional. You are exceptional because of the work that you do. And guess what? When there's a hard problem to be solved, when there's a problem that needs to be really solved and not appears to be solved, people will come looking for you because you have mastery and not just a certificate in hand. And then when you do something with a lot of craftsmanship and care, when you care about something a lot, I don't know if you've noticed, you tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the problem. You stay up at night thinking about it, not because somebody's paying you for it, because you really care about it. When you think a lot about a problem, you tend to have great insights. With great insights, inevitably will come creativity and imagination. So in my experience, innovation and creativity, the golden words for, in the business world, don't come from great genius. They come from care and craftsmanship. Now, for those of you in the room, in this auditorium, who are saying, I'm not one big on innovation. I don't want to be a Steve Jobs or a Da Vinci. I just want to turn up to work and feel good about it. I know many of you have had this concern. You're stepping back into the workplace after a break. We all know what a life of drudgery can be, right? So your big sense is, how do I get to work and feel energized and feel fully integrated as a human being? One of the beautiful aspects of having a craftsmanship-like orientation to work is that when you work with a great sense of absorption, you feel a great sense of flow. You get lost in the problem. Time stands still. In fact, the work doesn't feel like work. Right now, this doesn't feel like work to me. Work and life are inseparable. And when you feel that way, you also feel a great sense of freedom. And talking about freedom, when your work is not swayed by external incentives, you tend to have greater emotional stability. You tend to have greater freedom from institutional expectations and incentives. And with greater emotional stability comes a beautiful kind of power over your lives. And finally, I don't know how many of you notice this, when you relate to work with a great sense of care, playfulness, curiosity, love, absorption, what transforms is just not the work. You are transformed in the process. You're no longer the same person. If you haven't discovered already, you're not a person doing the work, you are the work. Artists don't do art. Artists are the art. Right? So one thing that you should think about, how do you want people who work with you, who live with you, to experience life as a consequence of hanging around with you? Do you want life to feel like a walk in the mall down the road? Or do you want them to feel and experience life like walking through these beautiful campuses? I want to leave you with one parting thought. In the last 2 years, I've seen many of you, the one question that you've obsessed over is, where am I going to be working? As you step into this new phase of life, and by the way, brilliantly done. Congratulations, excellent work. I know it's not easy to get into this place. I know the journey isn't easy, but you guys have done a brilliant job. Congrats for that. But I think the more important question and choice is the one that you're facing right now, which is not where to work, that matter's settled. It is how to work. Who do you want to become? Thank you so much.